morning and welcome to Titilayo TV newspaper review this morning. I am Titilayo Olamide, and starting with this morning is the Punch newspaper. And on the major news headline, it says, President's pay for understanding. It says Buhari ignorant, full of excuses, says PDP, ACF, PANDEF, and others. Buhari ignorant, full of excuses, says PDP, ACF, PANDEF, and others, and says ordering weapons, training troops in usage take time, says Buhari. Nigerians tired of your endless stream of excuses, PDP tells President. Nigerians tired of your endless stream of excuses, PDP tells President. Understand plight of kidnapped victims paying every ransom. Understand plight of kidnapped victims paying ransom, says ACF. And the stories can be found on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. And going downward, I have the pictorial picture of President Major General Muhammadu Buhari retired and other worshippers at the Eid al-Fitr prayers in the State House Abuja on Thursday. That's the picture news. And then coming forward, it says protest as customs men kill 5 Salah fund seekers in Oyo. Protest as custom men kill 5 Salah fund seekers in Oyo. And the story is on page 4 of the Punch newspaper. And next to it is page 11. And it says Buhari other mourns as ex-chief of defense staff dies at 80. Buhari others mourn ex-chief of defense staff at age 80, and the story is on page 11. And next to the story is screening begins as 21,000 battle for 5,000 Ogun teaching slots. Screening begins as 21,000 battle for 5,000 Ogun teaching slots, and you can find the story on page 9 of the Punch newspaper. And I have still going back to page 11, it says rumored Lagos IPOB planned attack meant to cause diversion. Rumored Lagos IPOB planned attack meant to cause diversion, says Oyaneze. And the story is on page 11 of the Punch newspaper. And next to it you can find the story on page 5. It says why sticks help as Ondo pastors and daughters demand 30 million naira. Why six helps as Ondo's pastors adopters demand 30 million naira. You can find this story on page 5 of the Punch newspaper. And the next to it is federal government to revive special terrorism prosecution court soon, says Malami. The federal government to revive special terrorism prosecution court soon. And this is coming from Malami. And this story is on page 11 of the Punch newspaper. And going upward, I have foreign sponsors driving Nigeria's infrastructure project, says World Bank. Foreign sponsors driving Nigeria's infrastructure project, says World Bank. And the story is on page 21. And then I move to page 22. Said LLC backs UPenk kicks against petrol subsidy remover. LLC backs UPenk, then kicks against petrol subsidy remover, and you can read the story on page 22 of the Punch newspaper. And then still on page 22 again, this is coming from NNPC. It says 3 refineries processed no crude oil in January. 3 refineries processed no crude oil in January, says NNPC, and that is on page 22. And lastly, say restructure your state. Stop regional campaign. Lawan tells governors, restructure your states. Stop regional campaign. Lawan tells governors. And this story is on page 12 of the Punch newspaper. And that leads us to the Vanguard newspaper this morning. And on the major news headline, it says Lawan Raja blasts Southern governors over call for restructuring. Lawan Raja blasts Southern governors over call for restructuring. And say restructure first at state level. Elected officials shouldn't lead agitation. Elected officials shouldn't lead allegation. That is coming from Lawan. And then agitations may be genuine, but governors shouldn't join calls for restructuring. And this is coming from Baja, and said, as we are all to blame, we're all to blame. And this story, you can read that on page 8 of Vanguard newspaper. And then coming down, I have that is on the state of insecurity. It says, no to special military operations in Southeast, South-South. No to special military operations in Southeast and South-South, says Ohanaeze, Afenifere, Pandef, and Khan. And the next to it, that's G7 countries committed to fund Boko Haram victims rehabilitation with 276 million euro. It said G7 countries committed to fund Boko Haram victims rehabilitation with 276 million euro. And this story can be found on page 9 of Vanguard newspaper. And then I move upward, that is on page 8. It says Buhari pledges action against bandit threat to food security. Buhari pledges action against bandit threat against food security. And then on page 11, it said agitation for Yoruba nation may degenerate into war if agitation for Yoruba nation may degenerate into war if. And this if, to find it out, you can move to page 11 of Vanguard newspaper, and this is coming from Ladoja, the ex-governor of Oyo State. And then they have Nigeria's diaspora remittance fall 27.7% in 2020. Nigeria's diaspora remittance fall 27.7% in 2020, says World Bank. And you can read this on page 19 of Vanguard newspaper. And the next to it is Buhari orders mourn as Dogoyaro, ex-chief of defense staff, that's at 80. Buhari orders mourn as Dongoyaro, ex-chief of defense staff, that is at 80. You can read this on page 35 of the Vanguard newspaper. And the next to it is the story of IPOB. It says, ignore rumors of attacks on Lagos on Ohanaeze. Igbo leaders tell Sanwo-Olu. Said he ignores rumors of attacks on Lagos or Ohanaeze. Igbo leaders tell Sanwo-Olu. And you can read more on the story from page 10 of Vanguard newspaper. And the next to it is APC diaspora. PDP urged federal government to name, prosecute sponsors of terrorists. Said APC diaspora. PDP urged federal government to name, prosecute sponsors of terrorism. That is on page 8 of Vanguard newspaper. And then that leads us to Daily Sun this morning. And on the major news headline says Buhari reveals handicap in fighting insurgents. Buhari reveals handicap in fighting insurgents. Say vows to stop bandits from causing food crisis. Save us, farmers, others cries out. Save us, farmers, others cry out. That is on page 6 of the lesson. Say Buhari Benue Governor Jang orders mourn as CDS Dongoyaro dies at 80. You can find the story on page 27 of Daily Sun. And then over it is Ohanaeze defense IPOB over Lagos attack allegation. Indido not agents of destruction, says Sanwo-Olu. Agitations replies army on slain second in command. And this story can be found on page 7 and 27 of the Lesson newspaper. And then coming down, what I have gunmen raise Abia police station, free detainees, attack local government headquarters. Kalu condemns attack. Gunmen raise Abia police station, free detainees, attack local government headquarters. Kalu condemns attack. And you can read the story on page 4, the lesson. And then I have not preparing to leave Nigeria, Ladoja. Not preparing to leave Nigeria, says Ladoja, claims building of railway in Niger Republic, refinery in Daura, part of groundwork. Said claims building of railway in Niger Republic, refinery in Dora, part of ground work. And this is coming from the ex-governor of Oyo State, Ladoja. And this story can be found on page 27 of the Listen newspaper this morning. And then I have government has lost focus on economic revival. Government has lost focus on economic revival. This is coming from the Bauchi State governor, and you can read the story on page 26 of the Listen newspaper. And then the president pledges to boost operational capabilities of NDLEA. Hails agency's performances so far. Said president pledges to boost operational capabilities of NDLEA and hails agency's performances so far. And that story is found in page 26 of the Listen. And then I move to page 6 and page 27. It says, Autumn, Senator praised Southern governors on open grazing ban. Autumn, senators praise Southern governors on open grazing ban. And it says, governors should allow us use juju to implement it. Governors should allow us use juju to implement it. And this is coming from the OPC. And it's another, I have another one here. It says, Delta Council set to enforce ban. Delta Council set to enforce ban. And you can read the stories on page 6 and 27 of the Listen. And then lastly, said federal government to resuscitate special terrorism prosecution court. Federal government to resuscitate special terrorism prosecution court. And this story is on page 26. And that we move to the Nation newspaper. And at the Nation newspaper, the major news headline have Lawan Gbagemiamila Adamu. They said Southern governors wrong. Southern governors wrong. This is coming from Lawan Gbagemiamila and Adamu, that the Southern governors are wrong. And they have an Igbo youth, not minorities representatives, Ladoja, okay, call for national dialogue restructuring. Says Igbo youth, not minorities, Ladoja calls for national dialogue restructuring. And it says federal officials yesterday shielded South governors for yesterday's Asaba declaration. And then next to it is Sultan tells Buhari governors to end insecurity. Sultan tells Buhari and the governors to end insecurity in the country. And then he said, President replied that we are working hard at it. And the president replied that they are really working hard to end the state of insecurity in the country. And this story can be found on page 5 of the Nation newspaper. And then underneath is experts seek more investment in agriculture for food security. Experts seek more investment in agriculture for food security. You can read more on the story on page 8 of the Nation newspaper. And then upward I move, said page 9, said police station raised, suspects freed in another attack by gunmen. Police station raised, suspects freed in another attack by gunmen. And the story is on page 5 of the Nation newspaper. And then next to it is 2.9 million IDPs in Nigeria, says UN agency. 2.9 million IDPs in Nigeria, says UN agencies. There are 70,000 refugees. And this story, to read more on it, to read about it, you can go to page 7 of the Nation newspaper. And then I have ex-ECOMOG Commander General Dongoyaro dies at 80. Ex-ECOMOG Commander General Dongoyaro dies at 80. Read the story on page 7 of the Nation newspaper. And lastly, I have Ondo Governor bans Deji of Akure from installing ships. Ondo Governor bars Deji of Akure from installing ships. You can read the story on page 27 of the Nation newspaper. And then I move to the New Telegraph newspaper this morning. And then the major news headline, this is on the 2023 general election, says power rotation, zoning, unsettling APC PDP convention stalled as parties consult. Power rotation zoning unsettling APC PDP convention stalled as parties consult. You can read the story on page 2 of the New Telegraph newspaper this morning. And then I have Defense Chief General Dongoyaro dies at 80. Buhari, Lalong, Jang, others mourn. And then I have on Kalu, he said he was a gallant officer, seasoned administrator. He was a gallant officer, seasoned administrator, and that is Kalu speaking about the ex-chief of defense staff, Dongoyaro. And you can read these stories on page 4 and 26 of the New Telegraph newspaper. And then I have Malami speaking here. It says Ibori suits against UK delaying $80 million loot repatriation. Ibori suits against UK delaying 80 million euro loot repatriation. Says federal government will soon resuscitate Special Terrorism Prosecution Court. You can find out the story on page 8 of the New Telegraph newspaper. And then I have on health issue. Said obesity in teens increases stroke risk before 50. Obesity in teens increases stroke risk before 50. You can read on this health issue on page 26 of the New Telegraph newspaper. And lastly, it's a federal government to move to cut $2.16 billion annual capital flight in telecoms. Federal government to cut $2.16 billion annual capital flights in telecoms. Frowns at foreigners' domination of telecoms management. Frowns at foreign domination of telecoms management. And with this, we've come to today's newspaper review this morning. Don't forget to join us by 12 p.m. for yet another news update. I'm Titilayo Olamide. Thanks for watching and do have a lovely day.